The Montreal Expos were a Canadian professional baseball team based in Montreal, Quebec. The Expos were the first Major League Baseball franchise located outside the United States. They played in the National League East Division from 1969 until 2004. Following the 2004 season, the franchise relocated to Washington, D.C., and became the Washington Nationals. Immediately after the minor league AAA Montreal Royals folded in 1960, political leaders in Montreal sought an MLB franchise, and when the National League evaluated expansion candidates for the 1969 season, it awarded a team to Montreal. Named after the Expo 67 World's Fair, the Expos originally played at Jarry Park Stadium before moving to Olympic Stadium in 1977. The Expos failed to post a winning record in any of their first 10 seasons. The team won its only division title in the strike-shortened 1981 season, but lost the 1981 National League Championship Series to the Los Angeles Dodgers. The team was sold in 1991 by its majority founding owner, Charles Bronfman, to a consortium headed by Claude Brochu. Philippe Lou was promoted to the team's field manager in '92, becoming MLB's first Dominican-born manager. He led the team to 4 winning seasons, including '94, where the Expos had the best record in baseball before a player's strike ended the season. Lou became the Expos leader in games managed at 1,409. The aftermath of the '94 strike initiated a downward spiral as the Expos chose to sell off their best players, and attendance and interest in the team declined. Following a failed attempt to disband the Expos, Major League Baseball purchased the team prior to the 2002 season after the club failed to secure funding for a new ballpark. In their final 2 seasons, the team played 22 home games each year at Hiram Bithorn Stadium in San Juan, Puerto Rico. On September 29, 2004, MLB announced the franchise would relocate to Washington, D.C. for the 2005 season, and the Expos played their final home game in Montreal. The Expos posted an all-time record of 2,753 wins, 2,943 losses and 4 ties during their 36 years in Montreal. Vladimir Guerrero led the franchise in both home runs and batting average, and Steve Rogers in wins and strikeouts. 3 pitchers threw 4 no-hitters. Bill Stoneman twice, Charlie Lee, and Dennis Martinez, who pitched the 13th official perfect game in Major League Baseball history. The Expos retired 4 numbers in Montreal, and 9 former members have been elected to the National Baseball Hall of Fame, with Gary Carter, Andre Dawson and Tim Raines, plaques depicting them with Expos caps. Professional baseball in Montreal dates back to 1890 when teams briefly played in the International Association. A second attempt at hosting a pro team failed in 1895. The Montreal Royals of the Eastern League were subsequently founded in 1897 and played 20 seasons. The Royals were revived in 1928 and were purchased by the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1939 to serve as one of their AAA affiliates. Under Dodgers management, the Royals won 7 International League championships and 3 Junior World Series titles between 1941 and 1958. In 1946, Jackie Robinson joined the Royals and led the team to a Junior World Series title in advance of his breaking baseball's color barrier 1 year later. By the late 1950s, the Royals' championship years were past, and faced with declining attendance, the team was sold and relocated following the 1960 season as the Dodgers reduced the number of teams they maintained at the AAA level. Almost immediately upon the Royals' demise, Montreal Mayor Jean Rapeau and City Executive Committee Chairman Jerry Snyder began their campaign for a Major League Baseball team. The city, which had previously been considered a leading candidate to acquire the St. Louis Browns if the team had relocated in 1933, was too late to submit its candidacy for a team as part of the National League's 1962 expansion, but presented its bid to the league's owners at the winter meeting in 1967. Aiding Montreal's bid was the fact that Walter Omley, who owned the Dodgers and formerly oversaw the Montreal Royals, was the chairman of the NL's expansion committee. On May 27, 1968, National League President Warren Giles announced the league would add expansion teams in San Diego and Montreal at a cost of $10 million. With the franchise secured, Snyder built an ownership group of 6 partners led by financier Jean-Louis Elvesque and Seagramer Charles Bronfman. Elvesque was originally tapped as chairman and the public face of the ownership group since he was a francophone. However, he bowed out, and Bronfman took over as chairman. The new group was faced with the immediate problem of finding a suitable facility in which to play for at least 2 years. Drapeau had promised the NL that a domed stadium thought to be a must due to Montreal's cold weather in April, October and sometimes September would be built by 1971. However, Snyder's successor as executive committee chairman, Lucien Saulnier, told Bronfman that Drapeau could not make such a guarantee on his own authority. As 1968 dragged on without movement from the city on the facility, Bronfman and his group threatened to walk away. While they had more than enough money between them to pay the first installment of the expansion fee, they wanted assurances that a park would be built before proceeding any further with the effort. The Lorimier Stadium, which hosted the Royals, was rejected even as a temporary facility. It could not be expanded beyond its 20,000-seat capacity because it was in a residential area. The Ottawa Stade, home of the Canadian Football League's Montreal Expos, was ruled out due to the prohibitive cost of expanding it and adding a dome, as well as doubts that the city even had the right to make the needed renovations to the federally owned facility. By August 1968, the NL owners had grown increasingly concerned about the unresolved stadium question, putting the franchise's future in doubt. There were rumors of awarding the franchise to Buffalo, New York instead, whose War Memorial Stadium was ready to host a team. League President Warren Giles was reassured of Montreal's viability when shown a 3,000-seat community field in the centrally located Jarry Park that Drapeau proposed expanding to 30,000 seats as a temporary home for the Expos, at a cost of over $1 million. Several options for a team name were considered. Royals was a popular option with fans in honor of the minor league Royals, but the name had already been taken by the Kansas City Royals. Other names considered included Voyagers and Nationals. The team settled on Expos, a name with the same spelling in French and English, in recognition of the recently concluded Expo 67 World's Fair. Less than a year after the city was awarded a team, the Expos took to the field to begin the 1969 season. With Gene Mauch as their inaugural manager, the Expos made their debut on April 8, 1969. An 11-10 victory over the New York Mets at Shea Stadium. The team played its first home game and the first major league game outside the United States on April 14. It was an 8-7 victory over the St. Louis Cardinals before 29,000 fans at Jarry Park Stadium. 3 days later, on April 17, in just the team's 9th game played in their history up to that point, Bill Stoneman pitched the first no-hitter in Expos history with a 7-0 victory over the Philadelphia Phillies. The excitement of the early season heroics quickly gave way to the realities of being an expansion team as the Expos struggled for much of their inaugural season. Montreal tied their expansion cousins, the San Diego Padres, for the worst record in the NL with a record of 52-110. The team fared little better in the following seasons. The Expos went 73-89 in 1970 and 71-90 in 1971. The team's best player and first star in its early seasons was Rusty Staub. Acquired from the Houston Astros in a trade prior to the Expos' inaugural season, he led the Expos with 30 home runs in 1970 and, owing to his red hair, was nicknamed Le Grand Orange. Staub was Montreal's lone representative at the Major League Baseball All-Star Game in the team's first 3 seasons, and endeared himself to the local fans by learning French. Also popular was pitcher Claude Raymond, who completed his Major League career with Montreal in '72 and was the team's first French-Canadian star. Pitcher Carl Morton, who posted an 18-11 record in 1970, was the first player in franchise history to be named National League Rookie of the Year. Bill Stoneman threw his second no-hitter, and the first pitched outside the United States, in a 7-0 win over the Mets in Montreal on October 2, 1972. The team failed to post a winning season in its first 10 years and finished 5th or 6th in the 6-team NL East 8 times. Attendance declined as the initial excitement of having a team wore off. It recovered briefly in '73 as the Expos mounted an unsuccessful charge at the NL East pennant, before declining sharply in '74 and beyond. By 76, attendance had dropped to just over 600,000 fans over the course of the season, less than half of what the Expos drew in their inaugural season. The on-field product was not the only concern for the Expos. Jarry Park was only intended to serve as a temporary home until 1971 at the latest. Even allowing for this, it left much to be desired as a baseball venue. The grandstands were completely exposed to the elements, forcing the Expos to postpone a number of early season games. Additionally, the sun set directly in the face of first baseman, forcing delays. Due to numerous delays and cost overruns with its intended replacement, Olympic Stadium, the Expos were forced to stay in Jarry until 1976. The team's future was also placed in doubt following an angry speech by Bronfman in which he threatened to relocate his family and the Seagram Company outside Quebec if the separatist party Québécois won a majority government in the 76 Quebec election. The party Québécois did win the election, however. Bronfman and the Expos remained in Quebec. For the 1977 season, the Expos moved into their new ballpark, Olympic Stadium, 6 years later than originally scheduled. For a time in the 76 and 77 off-season, however, it appeared that the Expos would have to play at least the early part of the season at Jarry Park due to delays in securing a lease for Olympic Stadium. The team broke off negotiations not long after the PQ's landslide victory in the 76 provincial election. Negotiations dragged out through the winter, leading the Expos to begin selling 1977 season tickets under the assumption they would have to play at Jarry. However, an agreement was finally reached in early 77. A total of 57,000 fans attended Montreal's opening day 7-2 loss to Philadelphia. The new facility was a significant upgrade, although weather-related issues created by Montreal's harsh climate persisted until the stadium's roof was installed in 1987. Over the years, the stadium became notorious for its poor playing conditions. Players were frequently at risk for injury due to thin padding on the outfield fences, as well as the original artificial turf that remained in place for over 2 decades. Ultimately, the park became viewed as a white elephant. On the field, the Expos continued to fare poorly. The team won 75 games in 1977, and 76 games in 1978. Though the losing seasons mounted, the Expos built a solid core of players, led by Gary Carter, who went on to become one of baseball's best hitting catchers, pitcher Steve Rogers and outfielders Andre Dawson and Tim Raines. They supplemented their young roster with veteran acquisitions such as future Hall of Famer Tony Perez, and in 77, the Expos also hired Dick Williams as the team's manager. Williams had developed a reputation for nurturing young talent. He had managed the young Boston Red Sox team to the American League pennant in 1967 and the Oakland Athletics to back-to-back World Series titles in 72 and 73. In 79, Montreal had its first winning season in franchise history. In mid-July, the Expos led the NL East by 6.5 games, before finishing second to the Pittsburgh Pirates by 2 games with a 95 and 65 record. The fans responded. Montreal drew 2 million fans for the first time in franchise history, and it was the first of 5 consecutive seasons that the team was in the top 4 of National League attendance. Though they won 5 fewer games in 1980, the Expos finished merely 1 game behind the Philadelphia Phillies for the division lead. In both seasons, the Expos were in the hunt for the division title into the last weekend of the season before losing to the Ultimate World Series champion. In 1981, Charlie Lee pitched the 3rd no-hitter in franchise history. He defeated the San Francisco Giants on May 10, 1981. The Expos were in 3rd place in the NL East with a 30-25 record when the season was halted for 2 months by a players' strike. By the time the strike ended, 713 games had been lost and could not possibly be made up. Major League Baseball chose to adopt a split-season schedule, which gave the Expos a fresh start in the second half of the season. With the team languishing near the 500 mark in post-strike play, the club fired Williams and replaced him with scouting director Jim Fanning. The team continued to struggle, though, and had a 19-19 record with 15 games left to play. Montreal won 11 of the remaining games and finished in 1st place, a half game ahead of the Pittsburgh Pirates, thereby qualifying for the franchise's first postseason berth. Terry Francona caught the final out a fly ball hit by Dave Kingman to seal a 5-4 victory over the New York Mets in the clinching game. In the 1981 National League Division Series, the Expos faced the first half winners, the defending world champion Phillies. Montreal won the first two games, at Olympic Stadium, by identical 3-1 scores before dropping the following two games in Philadelphia. In the deciding fifth game, Montreal's Steve Rogers faced Steve Carlton in the pitchers' duel. Rogers pitched a complete game shutout as Montreal advanced to the 81 National League Championship Series with a 3-0 win. Facing the Los Angeles Dodgers, Montreal split the first two games of the best-of-5 series in Los Angeles before returning home for the final three games. Montreal won Game 3, but failed in their first attempt to close out the series by losing Game 4 and set up a deciding fifth game. The deciding game, postponed by a day-due to rain, was played October 19, 1981, in near-freezing temperatures. The game was tied at 1 entering the ninth inning when Fanning opted to have his top starter, Steve Rogers, come out of the bullpen to pitch. Rogers retired the first two batters before facing Rick Mundy. What followed was the defining moment in Expos history. On a 3-1 count, Rogers hung a sinking fastball that Mundy hit over the center field fence for the game-winning and series-clinching home run. The moment, and game, became known to Expos fans as Blue Monday. The dramatic loss was a bitter defeat for a franchise who by that time had been adopted as Canada's most popular baseball team. By the end of the 79 season, the Expos had earned a reputation for having one of the strongest player development systems in baseball. The team had stockpiled young talent throughout its roster, including 4 starting pitchers below the age of 23, and was hailed as the team of the 80s. When Montreal hosted the 82 Major League Baseball All-Star Game on July 18, 1982, Expos fans voted 4 of their own into the starting lineup: Carter, Dawson, Raines and Rogers, while Al Oliver was named as a reserve. It was only the second time since '69 the host team had 4 starters. The National League claimed a 4-1 victory in front of 59,000 fans in the first All-Star game held outside the United States. Rogers was the winning pitcher. Baseball historian and author Jonah Kerry argued in his book Up and Away that no one at the stadium could know it then, but baseball in Montreal peaked that night at the Big O. The Expos were widely predicted to win the NL East in '82. Sports Illustrated, Baseball Digest and The Sporting News were among the publications that favored Montreal. However, the team disappointed. Montreal finished third in the division with 86 wins. The Expos replaced Fanning with Bill Verdon in '83, and under their new manager, led the division in mid-July. However, the team faded down the stretch and finished with an 82-80 record. The Expos won more games between '79 and '83 than any other team in the NL East, but had only one postseason appearance to show for it. Hoping to turn the team's fortunes around, the Expos signed 42-year-old veteran Pete Rose, who was second all-time in base hits to Ty Cobb, to a 1-year contract in 1984. Rose reached a career milestone in Montreal's home opener by recording the 40th USANDTH hit of his career in the victory over Philadelphia on April 13. Though players and management had praised the acquisition of Rose and predicted he would help the team win the division, he was ineffective for Montreal. Rose batted only .259 and failed to hit a home run in 95 games before he was traded back to his original team, Cincinnati, and Montreal finished with a losing record on the season. Montreal's failed '84 season resulted in a 31% decrease in attendance. At the same time, salaries were escalating throughout baseball. As a consequence, the Expos completed a major trade following the season, sending Gary Carter to the New York Mets on December 10, 1984, in exchange for 4 players. In trading Carter, the Expos gave up a team icon who, like Rusty stood before him, endeared himself to the fans by learning French and being one of the most accessible players on the team. The trade came 1 year after Bronfman had called the 7-year, $12.6 million contract Carter signed in 1981 the biggest mistake he had made in his life. The economics of Major League Baseball also resulted in the departure of Andre Dawson following the '86 season. Throughout that off-season, MLB owners colluded at the behest of Commissioner Peter Ueberroth to drive salaries for free agents down. Dawson, who should have been one of the most valuable free agents on the market that year, discovered that not only was there little interest in signing him, but that the Expos were publicly commenting about his knee problems in an effort to further drive interest down. Angered by these actions, Dawson walked into the Chicago Cubs training camp with a signed, blank contract. The Cubs agreed to sign Dawson to a 1-year, $500,000 contract, less than half of his previous salary. Dawson hit 49 home runs and drove in 137 runs in 1987, attaining the honor of NL Most Valuable Player. Tim Raines was also affected by collusion. After receiving no offer worth more than the $1.5 million he earned in '86, Raines returned to the Expos on a 3-year, $5 million contract. He had one of the best seasons of his career in '87, leading the NL with 123 runs, stealing 50 bases, batting .330 and hitting 18 home runs. He was also named the most valuable player of the '87 Major League Baseball All-Star Game, as he drove the game's only 2 runs with a triple in the 13th inning. Raines was ultimately traded to the Chicago White Sox in 1990. On the field, the Expos won just 4 games more than they lost between '86 and '91 as the organization set about rebuilding its development system and acquiring a new generation of players. The team struggled to attract free agents to Montreal, and Bronfman had grown disillusioned with both the business of baseball and the challenge of drawing fans to Olympic Stadium for a middling ball club. He hoped to take one more chance at winning a title, however, and in 1989, the Expos made a push for a division title by acquiring starting pitcher and pending free agent Mark Langston from the Seattle Mariners. The price would ultimately prove to be a high one as the Expos gave up future Hall of Famer Randy Johnson and 2 other pitchers. The trade helped propel the Expos to first place in the NL East by the All-Star break. They held the top spot into August before Langston and the team collapsed. The Expos finished 4th in the division with an 81-81 record, and Langston left Montreal as a free agent. Bronfman grew increasingly uneasy about the reckless spending of his fellow team owners, increased strife with the players, and overall direction of MLB. According to then-team president Claude Brochu, the team's late-season decline in '89 proved too much for Bronfman, who asked him to seek a buyer for the team. Bronfman hoped to sell the team for around $50 million, but both he and Brochu found it impossible to find a local businessman willing to take primary ownership of the team. Groups from American cities were interested, however. One group offered to buy the club for $135 million and relocate it to Miami. However, Bronfman viewed a relocation as a last resort. Robert E. Rich Jr. offered to buy the club for $100 million and relocate it to Buffalo at their recently built pilot field, but received the same response. Instead, Brochu opted to lead the group himself. The city and the province agreed to fund $33 million of the $100 million sales price Bronfman had settled on, after which he and partner Jacques Emnard convinced 11 other Canadian businesses and businessmen such as Bell Canada, Desjardins Group, the Gene With a new ownership group in place, the Expos traded Tim Raines to the Chicago White Sox in the 5-player deal. General manager David Dombrowski fired manager Buck Rogers, who had managed the team since '85, after the team started the '91 season with a 20-29 record, replacing him with Tom Runnels. Mark Gardner pitched 9 no-hit innings in a July 26, 1991 game before losing in the 10th inning to the Los Angeles Dodgers. 2 days later, also in Los Angeles, Dennis Martinez achieved a rare feat, throwing the 13th official perfect game in Major League Baseball history. Dave Van Horn's iconic call of El Presidente, El Perfecto, following the final out became a hallmark of Expos lore. Martinez's catcher, Ron Hasse, also caught Len Barker's perfect game 10 years earlier and remains the only player to catch 2 perfect games in MLB history. The euphoria of the pitching feats did not last, as the Expos were rendered homeless for the final month of the season after a 50-ton beam collapsed from Olympic Stadium's structure and fell 9 meters onto public concourse hours before a motocross event on September 13th. The Expos hinted that they would have to open the '92 season elsewhere unless Olympic Stadium was certified safe. While the stadium itself was given a clean bill of health by engineers in November, it took longer to get one for the roof since it had been badly ripped in a June windstorm. Ultimately, it was decided to keep the roof closed at all times. It had only been opened 88 times in a little more than 4 years. The Expos finished 1991 with a 71-90 record, 6th in the NL East, and drew fewer than 1 million fans for the first time since '76. However, the foundation of the Expos' future was establishing their places in MLB. Larry Walker, Marky Grissom and Delino DeShields had made their debuts the season prior, and the team acquired Moises Alou in a trade with Pittsburgh. Moises' father Philippe, who had been a long-time employee of the Expos, was promoted to manager during the '92 season and became the first native of the Dominican Republic to manage a Major League Baseball team. In 1993, DeShields was sent to Los Angeles in exchange for Pedro Martinez. The deal was initially pilloried by the Montreal Gazette and other local publications as a move designed to save money rather than improve the ball club. Nonetheless, the Expos improved on the field. They won 87 games in 1992, 94 games in 1993 and finished second in the NL East both seasons. The Expos were recognized as having a strong team entering the '94 season, but their hopes of winning the division were significantly impacted by realignment, as the three-time defending West Division champion Atlanta Braves were shifted to the East. Atlanta opened the season with 13 wins in 14 games, and quickly opened up an 8.5 game lead on Montreal. By late June, the Expos had moved to 2.5 games back when they hosted the Braves. Montreal won 2 out of 3 games in the series, including a late-game victory in the opener over future Hall of Fame pitcher Greg Maddux that the players viewed as the turning point of their season. Montreal then embarked on a West Coast road trip in which they won the final 5 games and entered the All-Star break in first place. The Expos pulled away from the Braves after the break. Between July 18th and August 11th, Montreal won 20 games and lost only 3. For the second time in team history, 5 players were named All-Stars: Moises Alou, Wilker Darrow, Darren Fletcher, Marky Grissom and Ken Hill. An offense led by Marky Grissom, Moises Alou, Larry Walker and Wilker Darrow scored more than 5 runs per game. With a record of 74-40, on pace for a 106-win season as the pitching staff with Butch Henry, Ken Hill, Jeff Facero and a young Pedro Martinez put up the National League's best ERA. The Expos had the best record in baseball on the morning of August 12th, when MLB's players went on strike. The season began without a collective bargaining agreement as MLB's owners could not agree on how to share revenue between teams. Many teams were unwilling to agree to revenue sharing unless a salary cap was put in place, something which the Major League Baseball Players Association adamantly opposed. Unable to come to an agreement, the owners attempted to unilaterally force their system into effect, prompting the players to walk out. Most of the players believed they would be back on the field by Labor Day at the latest. On September 14th, following a month of fruitless negotiations, the remainder of the season was cancelled. The franchise would never reach the playoffs as the Expos again. From Broku's perspective, a salary cap was not a major concern for the Expos as they could not afford to spend the maximum value of any negotiated cap. But when the strike ended 8 months later, by the order of United States Federal Judge Sonia Sotomayor, the failure to implement strong revenue sharing was a major blow to the Expos. The team had already built a reputation as a penny-pinching organization with the second lowest payroll in MLB in 1994. Following the strike, the team initiated a fire sale of players. Ken Hill, John Wetteland and Marky Grissom were traded while Larry Walker was allowed to leave as a free agent. Moises Alou, Pedro Martinez and Mel Rojas would eventually follow. In his book, My Turn at Bat, Broku argued that the fire sale was the only viable option, since his partners in the ownership group were not interested in financing the team's losses. Broku estimated that had he tried to keep the '94 team together, the Expos would have lost $25 million in '95, which would have pushed the franchise to the edge of bankruptcy. He claimed that he would have certainly kept Hill, Wetteland, Grissom and Walker had the partners been willing to put up the money necessary to keep them in Montreal. When Broku told General Manager Kevin Malone that Hill, Wetteland, Grissom and Walker all had to go, Malone tried to persuade Broku to keep at least one of them. It was to no avail. Broku told Malone that they all had to be off the roster by the deadline for salary arbitration, even though this made it all but impossible to get any leverage in possible deals. As a result, the Expos got almost nothing in return. The strike and ensuing fire sale left fans in Montreal livid. The Expos finished last in the NL East in '95, and average game attendance fell by nearly 26%, from 24,000 to 18,000. Interest in the Expos continued to decline in the years that followed. They would never average more than 20,000 fans per game in a season again during their tenure in Montreal. While noting the Atlanta Braves went on to win 11 consecutive NL East titles following the strike, Jarry expressed the viewpoint of the fans as it related to Broku and the team's owners. Expos fans couldn't help but wonder if that could have been them celebrating every year had Broku convinced the team's cheapskate owners to spend a few damn dollars, or taken a leap of faith that short-term financial pain would lead to long-term success. The media, meanwhile, had taken to calling the Expos a AAA team, as the team seemed to enter a period where they would develop players only to move them on to other organizations. In spite of the sharp decline in attendance, Broku claimed the Expos turned a small profit in '95, while ticket sales increased in other markets in the seasons following the strike, though Montreal's fan base continued to erode. Even with the loss of most of their best players, the Expos were competitive in '96, achieving second place in the NL East with an 88-74 record. The team fared poorly in the following 5 seasons, however, finishing with a losing record in each year and no higher than 4th in the division. Individually, Pedro Martinez became the first native of the Dominican Republic and only Expo to win the National League Cy Young Award. He won the award in '97 after recording an 18-7 record with an earned run average of 1.9. 1 week after he was announced as the NL Cy Young winner, Martinez was traded to the Boston Red Sox as part of another salary purge. As the '90s wore on, interest in the Expos dwindled to the point that they were barely part of Montreal's sports landscape. Lou recalled in the latter part of the decade, an old friend of his who owned a team in the Dominican Republic came to Montreal for a visit and couldn't find any downtown store that sold Expos caps, nor did he see anyone wearing an Expos cap during his week-long stay in the city. When he took a taxi to a game at Olympic Stadium, the driver couldn't find the entrance, and there were no signs anywhere touting games. According to Lou's friend, with such lackluster marketing, it was no surprise that the Expos couldn't attract any fans. Kerry later wrote that the Expos would not have been in this position had a better financed champion, with the resources and the patience to shepherd the team through the '90s, bought the team. Broku attempted to convince his partners that the only long-term solution to keep the Expos in Montreal was to replace Olympic Stadium. In addition to being poorly located far from population centers, restaurants, and bars, fans perceived it as cavernous and unsafe. Additionally, free agents were letting it be known they were not willing to play for the Expos because of Olympic Stadium's poor playing conditions. A proposed 35,000-seat downtown facility, to be called Labatt Park, was announced in '97 with a budgeted cost of $250 million and an anticipated opening date of 2001. It would have been a retro classic park with a facade reminiscent of historic Bonaventure Station. According to a Montreal Gazette editorial supporting the new park, Broku's threat to move the team unless Olympic Stadium was replaced was simple logic. Broku sought $150 million in funding from the provincial government, but Premier Lucien Bouchard refused, saying he could not authorize public funding for a stadium when the province was being forced to close hospitals and had still not paid the Olympic Stadium debt. Many members of the consortium instead favored selling the team. Hoping to pressure a sale, some members began to feed anonymous tips to the French press to make internal discord between Broku and his partners public. Attendance continued to fall, decreasing by 39% in 1998 to an average of 11,000 spectators per game. It was the first of 5 consecutive seasons in which Montreal drew fewer than 1 million fans. One of the few bright spots of this time was the blossoming of Vladimir Guerrero into a star. He made 4 consecutive All-Star games from '99 to 2002, each time as the Expos' sole representative. Guerrero would eventually be elected to the National Baseball Hall of Fame in 2018. By 1999, the partners publicly began to question Broku's fitness to lead the organization, and he was criticized by the media. Broku was also accused of having a secret deal with MLB Commissioner Bob Selig to relocate the Expos to Washington, the charges he denied in a spring press conference held to answer the accusations of his partners. Broku's rebuttals fell on deaf ears as fans sided with the consortium's smear campaign against Broku. He was ultimately replaced as managing general partner by American art dealer Jeffrey Loria, who was initially hailed as the franchise's savior. Loria had originally bid for the team in '91, but Broku and Emnard had balked at his demand for controlling interest. When Loria took control, he let it be known that Broku's low-budget approach, or as he called it, business as usual, was over. He promised to rebuild the Expos with a winning attitude and winning players, in an effort to bring the team back to where it had been only 6 years earlier. To that end, he drafted a new partnership agreement that gave him the right to call for cash investments in exchange for team equity, an option that had been unavailable to Broku. Most of the minority partners, though, continued to treat their participation as a public relations gesture and remained uninterested in investing additional money. When Loria issued a cash call in May 2000, the only other partners to increase their contributions were Kuchu, Loblaw, and Stephen Brunfman. Rather than contribute more money, the minority partners proposed trading the row. Loria instantly vetoed this suggestion. As Loria increased his own financial contribution over the next 2 years, most of the other partners failed to do likewise, which resulted in Loria raising his share in the franchise to 92%. Speaking in retrospect, one of the minority partners, Mark Rautenberg, said that he was both fooled and used by Loria, and called him a carpetbagger. The team payroll for 2000 increased to $33 million, nearly double the $18 million from the previous season. However, Loria's options for rebuilding the team were somewhat limited. He discovered that he needed to improve the team immediately in order to win back the fans' trust, rather than relying on long-term improvements via the draft. Even with the team's renewed willingness to spend more on talent, most elite players were reluctant to play in Montreal, given the franchise's uncertain future and Olympic Stadium's poor playing conditions. As a result, most of the increased payroll came from the signings of free agent pitchers Graham Lloyd and Hideki Irabu, as well as a three-way trade with the Rangers and Blue Jays that brought Rangers first baseman Lee Stevens to Montreal. These moves failed to translate into on-field success. Lloyd missed the entire season due to arthroscopic surgery. Irabu posted a 7.22 ERA, and Stevens only batted .265. The Expos lost 95 games. Interest in the team continued to decline, as both fans and businesses were unwilling to lend their support to a non-competitive team. Loria continued to pursue the construction of a new ballpark. He sought support from Major League Baseball, the Quebec government, and architectural firm HOK Sport for a cheaper and redesigned version of Labatt Park that eschewed the retro classic concept in favor of a more modern design with curved contours and glass. HOK and MLB both thought Loria's proposed design was structurally unsound. More seriously, although Loria had been led to believe that Emnard had convinced the provincial government to contribute funding, in reality no agreement had been reached. To bolster the team's finances, Loria tried to renegotiate the Expos' broadcasting deals, which were far less valuable than that of any other team. He broke off negotiations with the Sports Network, the largest English-language cable sports network in Canada, when it only offered the Expos $5,000 per game. Even allowing for the Expos' greatly reduced home territory compared to that of the Blue Jays, TSN's offer was still a pittance compared to the $200,000 it paid the Blue Jays at the time. Loria had similar issues with prospective radio partners. The only interested parties would only air Expos games as part of a brokerage agreement in which the team paid for the airtime. The Alouettes and Canadiens had similar arrangements, which was considered highly unusual for the time. Although the team continued its French radio coverage on the Telemedia network, whose flagship, CKC, had carried the Expos since 1973, the Expos were unable to reach an agreement for English radio broadcasts. This resulted in the end of the Expos' long-time run on CIQC, which had been the Expos' English radio outlet for all but 4 years of their existence. No television coverage was available in either language. This left English-speaking fans relying on internet audio casts. Local fans accused Laurier and his stepson, David Sampson, of sabotage. In truth, though, according to longtime Montreal sportscaster Mitch Melnick, there was no Anglophone radio for the 2000 season because nobody wanted to pay for it. Years later, Sampson said that he had initially hoped that if the Expos got off to a hot start, local broadcasters would initiate new negotiations, but further discussions never materialized. Dave Van Horn, the team's English-language play-by-play announcer since the team's inception, left at the season's end to work for the Florida Marlins. In 2001, the Expos drew only 642,000 fans, one of the smallest totals in MLB in decades. The minority partners, whose interest was now reduced to a combined 7%, became convinced that Laurier had planned his moves to force them out. When pleas to Selig and MLB officials fell on deaf ears, the group became convinced that Selig and Laurier had conspired to force the Expos out of Montreal. At the same time, MLB took steps to vote on contraction of the leagues, with the Expos and the Minnesota Twins slated for elimination. On November 6, 2001, MLB's owners voted 28-2 in favor of contraction, with only the Expos and Twins opposed. Initial plans called for the Expos and Twins to play a lame duck season in 2002 before their franchises were revoked. Both teams were saved following a legal challenge filed in Minnesota that forced MLB to honor the Twins' lease with the Metrodome, as well as challenges by the MLBPA, as MLB was unable to find another candidate team to abolish. The immediate threat for the Expos diminished, as MLB needed to keep an even number of teams to maintain its schedule. Shortly afterward, Laurier sold the Expos to MLB and used the money he received from a sale to purchase the Florida Marlins from John Henry, who had recently purchased the Boston Red Sox. As a result of the transaction, Laurier turned a significant profit on his initial $16 million investment. MLB bought the Expos from him for $120 million and gave him a $38 million interest-free loan to complete the purchase of the Marlins. Following the sale, Laurier took virtually everything of value with him to Miami, including the Expos, computers and scouting reports. His departure also marked the final end of the proposed Labatt Park, though any realistic chance of the park being built ended when the Bouchard government repeated its previous refusal to commit any public money to the project. MLB formed Expos Baseball LP, a partnership of the other 29 clubs, to operate the team. It appointed former Anaheim Angels president Tony Tavares as team president to oversee business operations and oversee a future move of the team, and Mets assistant general manager Omar Minaya as vice president, general manager and operating head of the franchise. MLB's chief disciplinarian Frank Robinson was appointed as the team's manager. Minaya, the first Latino general manager in baseball history, inherited a difficult situation. He was hired only 72 hours before the start of spring training, and there were only 6 other employees in baseball operations. Most of the others had either followed Laurier to the Marlins or taken jobs with other clubs. As the Expos began what many assumed at the time to be their final season in 2002, the mood in the Olympic Stadium for the home opener victory over the Marlins was ugly. Montreal's home opener drew 34,000 fans, many of which came not only to say goodbye to the franchise, but also to express their disgust and anger at Laurier. Laurier's minority partners, who had gone from collectively owning 76% of the Expos to less than 7% of the Marlins, filed a racketeer-influenced and corrupt Organizations Act lawsuit against Major League Baseball, Selig and Laurier. The partners contended that Laurier and the Commissioner's office had conspired to deprive them of their shares by issuing cash calls, and thus deliberately undermine the franchise's future in Montreal. The partners were ultimately unsuccessful in their suit, as it was dismissed in 2005 after an arbitration panel rejected their claims. On the field, the 2002 Expos exceeded expectations and were in playoff contention for much of the season. As they were owned by the other teams, including their direct competitors, the Expos did not have any flexibility to increase their payroll for a last-ditch postseason drive. Operating under the belief that the Expos were playing their last season in Montreal, Minaya completed a blockbuster trade with the Cleveland Indians in late June to make a final run at bringing postseason success to the city, acquiring Bartolo Colon, one of baseball's top pitchers, in exchange for several star prospects and without increasing payroll. Remembering how the Seattle Mariners had revived a stalled bid for what became Safeco Field with a playoff run in '95, Minaya believed that if the Expos made the playoffs, the renewed public and private sector support would lead to a viable owner stepping forward who would keep the team in Montreal. Minaya made several smaller moves, but the team lost its early season momentum. They went 7 games under 500 in July and August. The Expos finished with an 83-79 record, their first winning season since '96, but finished second in the NL East, 19 games out of both the division lead and the wild card. The Expos franchise was saved by a new collective bargaining agreement between the owners and players that forbade contraction until at least 2006. Speculation of contraction was replaced by rumors of relocation, as it was obvious MLB did not intend to keep the team in Montreal. While MLB was not ready to relocate the Expos right away in 2003, it sought to increase revenues by having the team play 22 of its 81 home games in San Juan, Puerto Rico. The Expos again found themselves in contention for the playoffs. On August 29th, the team was tied with 4 other clubs for the National League wildcard spot. When MLB's rosters expanded on September 1st, Selig announced that the Expos would not be recalling any additional players from the minor leagues. The other owners had decided against spending a few extra $1,000, a small fraction of the team's $35 million payroll, to bolster the team. Several players, including relief pitcher Eric Knott, were sent back to the minors due to budget constraints. The team faded again, finishing 18 games out of first in the East and 8 games out of the wild card spot. Later, Minaya said that the denial of the September call-ups was a message to the players, and a momentum killer. Kerry later wrote that MLB's refusal to authorize the September call-ups eroded what goodwill the Expos still had among the Montreal fanbase. After the season, Jarry was lost to free agency, while staff ace Javier Vizquez was traded to the Yankees. The final season of the Montreal Expos came in 2004, and was again split between Montreal and San Juan. The team never recovered from an April win-loss record of 5-19, and finished the season with a 67-95 record. On September 29, 2004, Major League Baseball announced that the franchise would relocate to Washington, D.C. for the 2005 season. That same night, the team played its final game in Montreal, a loss before 31,000 fans. The team then played its final games as the Expos on the road, ending on October 3 against the New York Mets, the team they had faced in the franchise's inaugural game in 1969. In the Expos' last ever game, the New York Mets defeated Montreal at Shea Stadium. Jamie Carroll scored the last Expos run, and NDCH Vez became the final Expos batter in history when he grounded out in the top of the 9th to end the game. The team ended their 36-year run with an all-time record of 2,753 wins, 2,943 losses and 4 ties. The last active former Montreal Expos player in the major leagues was Bartolo Colon, who played what is likely his last game with the Texas Rangers in 2018. Colon played half a season with the Expos in 2002. The Washington Nationals occasionally wear Expos throwback uniforms. The Nationals won the 2019 World Series, the franchise's first title in its 51 seasons, under manager Dave Martinez, who had played with the Expos from '88 to '91.
Baseball Asterisk is proud to present the history of the Washington Nationals. The Washington Nationals are an American professional baseball team based in Washington, D.C. The Nationals compete in Major League Baseball, MLB, as a member club of the National League, NL, East Division. From 2005 to 2007, the team played in RFK Stadium while their permanent stadium was being built. In 2008, they moved into Nationals Park, located on South Capitol Street in the southeast quadrant of D.C., near the Anacostia River. The Nationals are the 8th major league franchise to be based in Washington, D.C., and the first since 1971. The current franchise was founded in 1969 as the Montreal Expos as part of the MLB expansion. After a failed contraction plan, the Expos were purchased by MLB, which sought to relocate the team to a new city. Washington, D.C. was chosen in 2004, and the Nationals were established in 2005 as the first franchise relocation in MLB since the third Washington Senators moved to Texas in 1971. While the team initially struggled after moving to Washington, the Nationals had considerable success throughout the 2010s. The team had two back-to-back first overall picks in the MLB draft in 2009 and 2010, where they drafted Steven Strasburg and Bryce Harper. The team achieved their first playoff berth and first division title in 2012. They won the National League East again in 2014, 2016, and 2017, but failed to advance past the NLDS each time. In 2019, the team advanced to the World Series, where they defeated the Houston Astros in 7 games to earn their first championship. Multiple short-lived baseball franchises, including 2 named the Nationals, played in Washington with the National Association in the 1870s. The first Washington Nationals team in a major league played in the American Association in 1884. Another Washington Nationals team also played in the Union Association during its only season in 1884. The first Washington Nationals of the National League played from 1886 to 1889. The Washington Statesmen played in the American Association in 1891, before jumping to the National League as the Senators the following season. The Washington Senators, who were often referred to as the Nationals, played in the National League from 1892 to 1899. They were followed by another Washington Senators franchise in 1901, a charter member of the new American League, who were officially named the Washington Nationals from 1905 to 1956. The first American League Senators franchise moved to Minneapolis after the 1960 season and became the Minnesota Twins. They were replaced in Washington by an expansion team, the second Senators franchise, which began play in 1961 and moved to Arlington, Texas after the 1971 season to become the Texas Rangers. The Montreal Expos were part of the 1969 Major League Baseball expansion, which included the Seattle Pilots, now the Milwaukee Brewers, Kansas City Royals, and San Diego Padres. Based in Montreal, the Expos were the first Major League team in Canada. They were named after the Expo 67 World's Fair. The majority share owner was by Charles Bronfman, a major shareholder in Seagram. The Expos' initial home was Jarry Park. Managed by Gene Mauch, the team lost 110 games in their first season, coincidentally matching the Padres' inaugural win-loss record, and continued to struggle during their first decade with sub-500 seasons. Starting in 1977, the team's home venue was Montreal's Olympic Stadium, built for the 1976 Summer Olympics. 2 years later, the team won a franchise-high 95 games, finishing second in the National League East. The Expos began the 1980s with a core group of young players, including catcher Gary Carter, outfielders Tim Raines and Andre Dawson, third baseman Tim Wallach, and pitchers Steve Rogers and Bill Gullickson. The team won its only division championship in the strike-shortened split season of 1981, ending its season with a 3-2 loss to the Los Angeles Dodgers in the National League Championship Series. The team spent most of the 1980s in the middle of the NL East pack, finishing in 3rd or 4th place in 8 out of 9 seasons from 1982 to 1990. Buck Rogers was hired as manager before the 1985 season and guided the Expos to a 500 or better record 5 times in 6 years, with a highlight coming in 1987, when they won 91 games. They finished 3rd, but were just 4 games behind the division-winning Cardinals. Bronfman sold the team to a consortium of owners in 1991, with Claude Brochu as the managing general partner. Rogers, at that time second only to Gene Mauch in number of Expos games managed, was replaced partway through the 1991 season. In May 1992, Felipe Alao, a member of the Expos organization since 1976, was promoted to manager, becoming the first Dominican-born manager in MLB history. Alao would become the leader in Expos games managed, while guiding the team to winning records, including 1994, when the Expos, led by a talented group of players including Larry Walker, Moises Alou, Marquis Grissom, and Pedro Martinez, had the best record in the major leagues until the 1994-95 Major League Baseball strike forced the cancellation of the remainder of the season. After the disappointment of 1994, Expos management began shedding its key players, and the team's fan support dwindled. Broca sold control of the team to Jeffrey Loria in 1999, but Loria failed to close on a plan to build a new downtown ballpark, and did not reach an agreement on television and English radio broadcast contracts for the 2000 season, reducing the team's media coverage. After the 2001 season, MLB considered revoking the team's franchise, along with either the Minnesota Twins or the Tampa Bay Devil Rays. In November 2001, Major League Baseball's owners voted 28-2 to contract the league by two teams, according to various sources, the Expos and the Minnesota Twins, both of which reportedly voted against contraction. Subsequently, the Boston Red Sox were sold to a partnership led by John W. Henry, owner of the Florida Marlins. In order to clear the way for Henry's group to assume ownership of the Red Sox, Henry sold the Marlins to Loria, and MLB purchased the Expos from Loria. However, the Metropolitan Sports Facilities Commission, operator of the Metrodome, won an injunction requiring the Twins to play there in 2002. Because MLB was unable to revoke the Twins franchise, it was compelled to keep both the Twins and Expos as part of the regular season schedule. In the collective bargaining agreement signed with the Major League Baseball Players Association, MLBPA, in August 2002, contraction was prohibited until the end of the contract in 2006. By that time, the Expos had become the Washington Nationals and the Twins had made sufficient progress towards the eventual building of a new baseball-specific stadium that contraction was no longer on the agenda. With contraction no longer an option for the immediate term, MLB began looking for a relocation site for the Expos. Some of the choices included Oklahoma City, Washington, D.C., San Juan, Puerto Rico, Monterrey, Mexico, Portland, Oregon, Northern Virginia, such as Arlington or Dulles, Norfolk, Virginia, Las Vegas, and Charlotte, North Carolina. Washington, D.C., and both Virginia locations emerged as the frontrunners. On September 29, 2004, MLB announced the Expos would move to Washington, D.C., in 2005. On November 15, a lawsuit by the former team owners against MLB and former majority owner Jeffrey Loria was struck down by arbitrators, bringing to an end all legal actions that would impede a move. The owners of the other MLB teams approved the move to Washington, D.C., in a 28-1 vote on December 3. Baltimore Orioles owner Peter Angelos cast the sole dissenting vote. Although there was some sentiment to revive the name Senators when the Montreal Expos franchise moved to Washington in 2005, legal and political considerations factored into the choice of Nationals, a revival of the first American League franchise's official name used from 1901 to 1956. Politicians and others in the District of Columbia objected to the name Senators because the District of Columbia does not have voting representation in Congress. In addition, the Rangers still owned the rights to the Senators name, although the Nationals were able to acquire the rights to the curly W logo from the Rangers. Citation needed: this logo looked a lot like Walgreens' logo, but the drugstore chain never sued because, even though people have trouble telling the logos apart, it is believed the chain does not see this as a problem. Washington, D.C., Mayor Anthony A. Williams supported the name Washington Grays, in honor of the Negro League team the Homestead Grays, 1929 to 1950, which had been based in Pittsburgh, but played many of their home games in Washington. On November 21, 2004, the team's management chose the name Washington Nationals. The club's official colors of red, white, and blue were revealed the next day. As part of the relocation, the Nationals played their first 3 seasons at RFK Stadium until Nationals Park could be built. Nationals Park was completed in 2008, and the Nationals played their first home game there on March 30, 2008. The game was nationally televised on ESPN, and former U.S. President George W. Bush threw out the first pitch. Ryan Zimmerman hit a walk-off home run to win the first game in the new stadium. When Ted Lerner took over the club in mid-2006, he hired Stan Kasten as team president. Kasten was widely known as the architect of the Atlanta Braves before and during their run of 14 division titles. Kasten was also the general manager or president of many other Atlanta area sports teams, including the Atlanta Hawks and Atlanta Thrashers. The plan, as it became known, was a long-range rebuilding and restructuring of the team from the ground up. This plan included investing in the farm system and the draft, and having a suitable team to go along with their new stadium. In the front office, the Nationals hired the well-respected former Arizona scouting director Mike Rizzo to be the vice president of baseball operations, second in charge under then general manager Jim Bowden. The Nationals began building the foundations of a contender with their first overall draft picks of Steven Strasburg, in 2009, and Bryce Harper, in 2010. In 2011, they signed Jason Worth to the team's first big free agent contract. With a mix of homegrown players and players acquired via trade and free agency, the Nationals clinched their first playoff berth and first division title in 2012. They were knocked out of the 2012 NLDS by the St. Louis Cardinals in 5 games after the Cardinals took the lead with 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th of Game 5. After missing the playoffs in 2013, they hired Matt Williams as manager and rebounded to win their second division title in 2014, but were eliminated in the 2014 NLDS by the San Francisco Giants. They missed the playoffs again in a turbulent 2015 season, leading to Williams' firing. 41. The team hired veteran manager Dusty Baker in 2016, and returned to the playoffs only to be eliminated by the Los Angeles Dodgers in the 2016 NLDS in 5 games. They won the NL East title in 2017, but were eliminated in the NLDS yet again after losing Game 5 to the Chicago Cubs. Baker's contract was not renewed after the 2017 playoff loss, and the team hired Dave Martinez as their 6th manager in 10 years. In 2018, the All-Star Game was played at Nationals Park. The Nationals failed to make the playoffs in 2018, finishing a disappointing second in a year they were expected to sail to the playoffs. After the 2018 season, star slugger Bryce Harper left the team via free agency, signing with the rival Philadelphia Phillies. The Nationals began the 2019 season with a record of 19-31, with their reported chances of winning the World Series at that time being 1.5%. They went from there with a 74-38 record, finishing with an overall record of 93-69 and earning a spot in the 2019 National League Wild Card game, which they won over the Milwaukee Brewers 4-3. In the NLDS, the Nationals defeated the Los Angeles Dodgers in 5 games, propelling them past the divisional round for the first time in franchise history. The Nationals then swept the St. Louis Cardinals in the NLCS, giving them their first NL pennant. The team then defeated the Houston Astros in Game 7 of the 2019 World Series, giving them their first World Series championship, with Strasburg being voted Series MVP. The World Series was the first in MLB history that saw no team win a game at home, as the road team won all 7.